Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Russ Horell. I'm Isentia's Chief Revenue Officer, and I'm coming to you from Isentia's Brisbane office in Australia on the land of the Turrbal people. I acknowledge their traditional ownership of this land and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. It's an absolute privilege for me to host this webinar today. Isentia has a proud legacy as the foundational media monitoring and measurement organisation across Australia, New Zealand, and the Asia Pacific region. Our goal as an organisation is to enable comms and PR professionals to navigate each day with confidence and to empower them to make superior decisions. As you are well aware, the communications landscape has never been more complex. And this is arguably most apparent when it comes to demonstrating the value of your work and understanding the impact of your communications actions on your audiences. At Isentia, we consistently see that organizations who have a clear communication strategy and are measuring at all stages of the communication cycle, from ideation through to execution and review, are the ones who are most successful. We also know that at leadership meetings and in 2026 planning sessions across the region right now, the question which keeps being asked is, how can we use AI in a safe, scalable, and sustainable way so that we can be more efficient and improve our decision making? And behind this question is often the unspoken hope for the AI easy button, that mystical, mythical one-click solution for all our most complex measurement challenges. Well, at Isentia, we're excited about how these two conversations are converging. And we believe that the real opportunity is not in simply automating old proxy-based metrics, but in architecting a new, smarter era of communication measurement. We finally have the tools to stop using inferior metrics and start building the true, sophisticated measurement systems we've always wanted. This webinar aims to move us beyond the quick fixes and help you to become the architect of your own measurement strategy. Now, I learned early in my 20-year career in the media intelligence industry that a key to success is to surround yourself with people much more intelligent than you and ask them lots of questions, which is exactly what you're going to see happen today. We're going to learn together from two communication and measurement industry masters who I'm fortunate to be able to call colleagues at Isentia. Let me introduce you to them. First, we have Ngaire Crawford. Ngaire leads insights and research at Isentia, driving innovation in measurement strategy and product development across the Pulsar Group. With nearly 2 decades of experience in communications research, he champions the power of insight to tell richer stories, shape smarter decisions, and prove the true value of communications. A passionate advocate for meaningful data and inclusive storytelling, Ngaire believes that great measurement doesn't just report impact, it creates it. Thank you for joining us today, Ngaire. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Prashant Saxena. Prashant is the VP for Research and Insights in Southeast Asia at Isentia. He oversees all aspects of Isentia's media intelligence across 6 markets and leads a team with over 10 gold awards for excellence in measurement from APAC, which is the International Association of the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. Prashant is also an adjunct professor at WKWSCI Nanyang Technological University, where he is pursuing a PhD on AI and authenticity and leadership and communication. Thank you for joining us today as well, Prashant. So this is how it's going to work. I'm going to ask a range of questions to Ngaire and Prashant, but we want you to be involved too. You'll see a Q&A box at the center of your screen. Please pose your questions there, and time permitting, we'll cover as many as possible. We'll also be asking you some questions via the poll function in this webinar, and we'll anonymously share your collective responses throughout the session. Finally, please note that this session is being recorded. We'll share the link in the coming days, so if you need to attend to an urgent matter, we've got you covered. Okay. Let's do this. We're going to launch our first poll question now, actually. As you'll see coming up on the screen, this is a scene setter which asks you whether you are currently using AI in some way to measure the success of your communication. So please share your thoughts and we'll check in on the results shortly. Okay, let's get into the questions. Let's start with you first, please, Ngaire. If 2024 and 2025 have been the era of experimentation or playing in the sandbox with AI measurement, what is the mandate for 2026?
I think I might have to be quite broaden my answer because I think one of the things about AI is that sometimes it feels like this just like hamster wheel of constant change and new information. So it's actually a little bit hard to imagine how much further advanced things will be over the next like 3 or 6 months, let alone the next 12. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that everyone has very different levels of exposure to AI, and I think we can certainly see that coming through in the poll results right now. Um, I've been like absolutely headfirst in it in 2025, and I know Prashant has as well, but that's because we're very much at the coalface a little bit. Like we're testing things, we're deconstructing things, and trying to design better research products. But I also know that this is still a little bit daunting to some people. I ran some measurement mentor sessions during November, and they were so fun. So if anyone is on this call that joined me for one of those, they were a really great time, and thank you for that. Um, but in those sessions, I really learned that there's still a lot of skepticism of AI, and that is probably resulting in limited uptake for structured tasks. I think people are using it a lot for ideation, but less so around kind of repeatable structured tasks. So, from my perspective, 2026, I think the mandate moves a little bit more into transparency rather than experimentation. It's transparency that really will drive, I guess, a sense of methodological integrity. We know now that AI can analyze and can summarize and can do things really, really fast and can recognize patterns, but those things are not necessarily insight. So those that often takes a little bit more work. Um, and that transparency links to this idea of we do need to be able to better understand source data and structure and use tools and expertise that you trust so that you can be really confident in what any measurement it is that they might be providing. And I think trust here becomes a really interesting concept. How much we do or don't trust specific models or organizations will continue to be really crucial. The sort of AI environment of companies is obviously in a new level of architecture, and in an environment where you can find almost, I mean, any opinion you want really at any point in time. I think knowing yourself and your goals and how different tools and software align, or in some cases don't, will be really central to that decision making. So I obviously have a bias towards making sure that numbers are well reasoned and but I think it's transparency that's going to allow for that better judgment. So knowing limitations and boundaries has always been a big part of research. I think it's just probably even more true now. So I'm going to say that 2026 is the year of transparency.
Nice. Year of transparency. I like that. Let's have a look at those poll results, which I think validate your point there. So yeah, we're seeing that 71% of our audience members are not currently using AI in some way to measure their communication success, and 29% are. So yeah, maybe next year, 2026 and beyond is the time that we start to dip our toe in the water and be led with transparency metrics. I'm going to go to you now, Prashant. So I'm interested, as Ngaire said, you have been playing in the sandbox already. What are some of the ways that your insights team is already using AI to empower clients with more powerful and impacting measurement?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. So it has started from not being the introvert nerds that Insights is sometimes expected to be, the typical persona or the archetype of Insights person. Now with AI, it's a lot moving towards, as Ngaire said, transparency, trust, and a lot of accountability. And how does that come about? It's about talking to clients, helping them in their decisions, as well as not being very descriptive, being very much a storyteller, but at the same time a strategist. And there's a balance to make there because AI can tell one a good story, especially a story of an echo chamber where one feels validated and feels good about things. But at the same time, what is the reality in a way in which it can be actionable? So with that point, we start to work backwards to see how does it look like on a day-to-day basis with clients. So quite a lot happening in the space within Isentia Insights. So what we are doing is to look at some of the signal detections, especially around risk. So we are looking at clients' context, different kinds of data points, seeing what kind of spikes are happening, and where do these spikes actually are the real ones versus false negatives or positives. So the way in which Insight's orienting itself is a lot about being real time, but at the same time being very accountable towards that real time nature. We're also seeing a lot of synthesis of different data points. This was starting already pre-2023, pre-ChatGPT, but now there is a lot of weightage towards what kind of data would you look at for what kind of solution and what kind of objective. So that's where a little bit of discerning comes in from an insights perspective. It's not about just jamming in different data sets and AIing it. It's a lot about in what context, what data needs to be weighted from what perspective, and different nooks and corners of media. We are also seeing this at scale now because audiences are quite dispersed. So the way in which we would look at it is that brands are not really appealing to one geography, it's across. And with that comes the challenge of languages. So now with AI, languages are sorted. And it's a lot about putting that cultural nuance to the language. And if you blend it all together, whether it's about detection, whether it's about synthesis and about scale, then it just ends up being a balance of storytelling and strategy. So that's the way in which we have been evolving, but 2026 is going to be an exciting one because there's a lot of workflow that can be worked towards to improve the storytelling, to improve the strategy.
Thank you, Prashant. Just a reminder that everybody, I'm going to ask a range of questions here, and but then we want to pass the virtual mic to you as well. So please use that Q&A box down the bottom of your screen to pose your questions, and we'll splice them into this conversation. Ngaire, back to you now. Every organization in their own way is grappling with AI. What's the biggest misconception that you're seeing about how AI will transform measurement and reputation tracking?
I think the biggest misconception I'm seeing is actually one that's not necessarily new. If anyone was around in the time that we all started talking about big data, just obsessively saying it all the time within every sentence, I'm still not convinced I know what big data necessarily means, but it's the same. The misconception is the same one that existed then, which is this idea that more data will automatically mean better insight. And that's not necessarily the case. There is this belief that because AI can ingest just sort of endless amounts of data, every tweet in existence, every article in existence, every internal email, that you will suddenly get an answer naturally emerging from volume. And that's not necessarily going to give you. So a lot of this is really around how you would use structure and frameworks to create something a bit more meaningful, because more data often just really creates a lot more noise, and AI doesn't exclusively solve that problem. It often amplifies more noise. You can see this a little bit when people get very excited about I guess the notion of real-time dashboarding and tracking everything. That can end up a little bit like paralytic. You drown a little bit in information, but can't find the meaning. You have too many things going on at once to necessarily make sense of it, or you've distilled it so much that you can't see the things that you need to see because you haven't seen them before, so you don't know that they're there. So I guess it all kind of comes down to this idea that AI can somehow replace judgment. And in communications, meaning is super contextual. Models are really good pattern finders, but they don't necessarily set what good looks like or understand the consequences of being wrong. And the antidote to that is always going to be good design. So starting with that decision of what would we do differently if this number moved up or down, or if we did know this piece of information, and starting there and then working backwards is going to help build that high quality data set. So I think the big thing is really understanding that volume is amazing from a perspective of having access to information and collecting data, but not necessarily, you can't stop there. You have to be able to navigate it the right way and build it to create more meaning and actually get some insight out of it.
Prashant, what are your thoughts on that? What are some of the biggest misconceptions you're seeing about how AI will transform measurement or reputation tracking?
Yeah, so I resonate with Ngaire because with a lot of big data, there's a lot of sameness that might happen. Because if one looks into all the kinds of data sets, pulls them together, AI hit, you will get similar answers. And those similar answers may not be the right answers as per the objectives. So it's a lot about asking the right questions first that brings in the experience and the nuance, and then treating the data with a lot of judgment. Because the data can be paralytic, it can also bring in that haziness in front of eyes that, hey, it's resonating with what I'm looking for. So good news, happy days, and then just go ahead with it and report it. And that's where the problem is, because if one is not being skeptical about the AI answers, we are not talking hallucinations here. We are talking echo chambers. Then one can really test and vet AI and then bring out the right insight, which makes sense given the objective. So a lot of sameness has to be taken care of, and a lot of haziness has to be conscious of.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Um, Nora, you mentioned there briefly around dashboards and that catchy slogan called real time insights. Practically, when executed properly, what will real time insights actually allow the people on the call in this webinar today to achieve that they haven't previously been able to?
I think that it is just not getting too hung up in the idea of real time in terms of insight. So being able to separate this idea of being alerted to information versus what might be intelligence. One's going to be really fast, the other one's going to be a bit more accurate. So this might be a somewhat controversial take, and because this is recorded, someone can clip it back to me when I'm proved wrong. But I don't believe that insights is real time. To have an insight, you need to have a level of context or thought or pause to be able to make sense of something. So that is, I think, part of just, I think, separating that idea or what is probably quite good branding. What you can get is real-time data and real-time detection. All of those things can come at you as fast as you want them to. But it really, where I like to make the differentiation is in that level of, human diagnosis. And that's where I think that human in the loop phrase comes in, is that it might introduce a really small amount of latency. It could be a few minutes, it could be a couple of hours, it could be a couple of days, depending on what it is that the context is. But it's being able to understand that actually when you take all of this information, you synthesize it, you've determined whether or not you need to take an action. It's being able to really understand what these things mean and what impact they might have had. It's those things that I think are the most valuable and exciting about the amount of data that we'll have access to, rather than it necessarily being about giving you, insight the fastest. Information for sure, but not necessarily insight.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it can become just a which way is the wind blowing a little bit quicker than you could previously find that out, but maybe realer time. But the emphasis on insights there, right? So we might go to the next poll question, because I was very impressed with how quickly everybody jumped onto the last one. And this one's a good one. This is, what measurement metrics would you like to see left behind in 2025? What are we putting in the bin? So we've got a couple of different options there. So yeah, jump on that, and we'll come back to the answers on that one shortly. Okay, next question. This one's for you both again. This is a fun one. We're going to ask you. We're gonna play Keep, Kill, and Create. Keep, Kill, Create. So looking at 2026 and beyond, what is one metric that we finally kill? What is one that we keep? And what's a new metric that maybe doesn't exist yet that we need to create? Ngaire, do you want to have a go at those first?
I love looking at those poll results. They're so interesting. I feel like I need a better science fiction or fantasy analogy for AVEs and why they won't die. I kept just coming back to the idea of a zombie, but I don't know if it's strong enough. So I'm just going to ignore the existence of AVEs for the time being, because there's also plenty of other bad metrics that really need the chop as well. I'm going to start with kill. I would like to kill cumulative reach, please. There's two things that really bother me about reach. It's a bias metric used commercially in an industry with vested reasons to keep it. So it's already a little bit dodge. But then for some reason, reporting reach figures cumulatively and implying that you actually like reached 5 billion people, like that is just a bit silly. And I think we all know that it's a little bit silly. It's not true. It doesn't give any context to anything. So I would like to kill reach. I would like to keep share of voice, but I have some caveats around it. I'd like to treat it as a more foundational metric. I think it's too often used as one that is a strategic one. It's really useful for like benchmarking your market presence. It's a bit more like a census than it is anything else. It doesn't tell you if you're winning, but tells you if you turned up, if you're on the field. So just to be a bit cheeky, I said I did want to keep it with an asterisk. You need to redefine the voice part of share of voice. So what do you actually want to have the leading share in? Is it the share of an idea? Is it a message? Is it a perception? And actually measure based on that rather than just who showed up. Create, I think, is a fun one because I'm very lucky in that that's something I get to actively do at the moment, work on what our future research methodologies will be. So without getting too detailed or technical about what we're testing at the moment, I think most new measurements fall into two different categories, and really that's around alignment and response. So alignment is really if what's important to you is reflected back to you across all forms of data. That could be external, internal, whatever data is available. And the other is really response. So what do things mean and do they drive a change? If that's a change in behavior, perception or whatever it is, but knowing that more actionable impact of any form of communication or reputation. So that's what I'd like to create. I'm very keen to hear what Prashant's going to keep and create as well.
Over to you, Prashant.
Yes, Ngaire, I now need to recraft my strategy because now we need to line up AVE and the crazy sheer volume together and probably blow them up with a tank. Because if we don't kill AVE and ignore it, it'll keep coming back. So, okay, let's shoot them together with a tank first and they're out of the way. Now we are left with the other metrics and some of them might need a haircut. We might want to look at, let's say, sentiment, but from a more contextual entity perspective on how a brand is being talked about from an overarching narrative perspective. So I would give it a haircut while keeping it. I would also look into share of voice, but in terms of what impact does it make. So that would be a one I would keep. And in that incubator of creation, probably would look at authenticity matrix. We have been incubating it quite a bit. And it has gotten some really good traction in terms of how clients are looking at it because it's kind of anti-AI. And authenticity is what we would create further and further and make it bigger than any other metric.
Nice. Okay. Well, we'll need to do this in a year from now and make sure to check out how accurate you guys were. We've got we had some spirited responses to the poll, so we might get that back up. So yeah, which measurement metrics would you like to see left behind in 2025? So as Ngaire and Prashant touched on that controversial ASR AVE is it's right up there with 44%, but then those kind of volumetric metrics like impressions, likes, and media releases sent was just pipped it at 47%, and there's some others in there as well. So please build those others into your questions that you're leaving in the Q&A. And thank you so much to Simon, Jason, and Francesca have already started to ask some questions. So we might go to a really great one that Simon Pleasance has asked. And we'll pose this to Ngaire and Prashant now. I've just clicked on the wrong button and lost it. There we go. All right. So Simon asked, I'm hoping I may be able to use AI to get more of a grasp of what my main stakeholders are doing as a result of understanding the information my organization communicates. Am I dreaming? Which I think is a good question, which goes to how has communication impacted the actions of my main stakeholders? Ngaire or Prashant, do you want to have a go at answering Simon's question there?
I can jump in and have a go. I think there's obviously a lot more context to that question, Simon, I'm sure. I mean, you're not dreaming. It's very much a bunch of things that you can do. It's just whether or not those things are right for the situation that you're in. So you can use AI to probably do a couple of different things. One is tactical in being able to turn your activity into data. So being able to make sure that you're measuring all of the interactions that you're having with stakeholders. It's a great way to consolidate that and make sure that you've got that data set to sort of prove action. In terms of if your stakeholders are doing anything as a result of what your organization communicates, that's going to be a little bit more about how you might use it to measure that echo. So it depends on how that communication might show up. Is it shifts in narrative language? Is it shifts in media profiles? Is it shifts in their own channels? Is it shifts in like investigative results or regulation? Using a particular formula, it could be like a custom GPT or something like that, to be able to look at data in a way that's from your perspective, use it and feeding that stakeholder data into it to see what echoes back to you is probably the easiest first steps. I don't know if you've got to build on that at all, Prashant.
Yes, I agree, Ngaire. Probably we would extend it further with some kind of virtuous loops. So as the organization communicates and as the stakeholders are looking at it, whether the communication has gone right as per the objectives or might have gone slightly off, it's a lot about creating those virtuous loops through AI. Exactly the tools that you mentioned and the frameworks, whether it's about custom GPT or whether it's all about just looking at the right matrix, a hybrid of it, and then creating that virtuous loop so that the behavior part of it is sorted, because AI shortens the time, so it does speed things up. And in a virtuous loop, it can be really good, because now the organization is moving at a much better momentum as stakeholders start to get into some good virtuous loops.
Thanks, guys. I might ask another audience question. This one's from Francesca Broom. Jason, I'll come back to yours shortly when we delve into the topic of reputation. It'll fit nicely there. But please, thank you so much for those questions starting to flow through. Please keep them coming, and we'll weave them in. But Francesca asks Prashant and Ngaire, are there ways that we can better use AI to forecast reach more realistically? What's the answer to cumulative reach, Ngaire?
I feel like the thing that is most interesting to me about a substitute for reach, which you could use AI to do, or not specifically, is more, I think, understanding the influence of publications for outlets is more valuable. And one of the easy ways to do that is to understand how it shows up in other places. Understanding how often specific publications are referenced in the online forums that you care about or with the stakeholders that you care about, ensuring that your stakeholder surveys have a set of questions about what kind of media people prefer, where did they last see something about you, and building that up so that what you're actually looking at is publications of influence rather than publications that might have high audience. And that can be AI driven or not, but I think that's the biggest frame change, is looking more for influence with the people that you care about rather than necessarily just general reach.
Yeah, I would take in a cue from entrepreneurship. So remember, when we do business plans, we have this total addressable market, which is everybody out there. and then the serviceable addressable market, which is all about the ones who will really buy. So if you think of audience from that perspective, the wild reach is the total addressable market. Anybody can be reached. Does it make sense to us from how we'll sustain as a comms team? Probably not. Then we start going into serviceable, which is more realistic. And that's where targeted reach might come in, people who you want to influence. And then are we getting that influence right? That would mean some kind of weightage to the right platform, to right outlets, and within that, the smaller communities. So if we take that concept of serviceable addressable market and apply that to comms measurement, reach starts to evolve itself into something which is more targeted, something which is more customized as per the organization's objectives, and at what point the organization is trying to reach what kind of audiences.
Thanks, guys. All right, Ngaire, question for you. We often hear that prompt engineering is the new technical skill, the modern coding they call it. But I think you can make it a strong argument that it's actually just a communication skill, right? And do communicators actually have a home field advantage in the AI era simply because they know how to use language effectively? And what does this potential reality mean for the importance of PR and comms as a profession moving forward?
Yeah, the short answer on this is yes. I think actually a really great friend of mine posted something on LinkedIn that was the perfect encapsulation of this. She's an ex-journalist and has moved into communications consulting, and how she framed it was really a breakthrough for me in terms of how I started showing up about AI and stepping into the space of leading some of these more product development conversation with a bit more confidence in my role and my ability. And the way that she phrased it was that the future doesn't actually belong to those who are the most technical, but those who are the most articulate, which I think is, if you think about it, it's not so much about coding or staring at Python for hours, which is something I've tried and failed to do many, many times. It's actually being able to understand and articulate an outcome and how you might get to that outcome and how you might deconstruct the language you need to use to be able to get to that outcome. And if you think about the role of communications, which is really, understanding audiences, driving change, communicating in all of its forms, there's sort of no greater alignment than that. It's a very transferable skill. So I think there's an incredible advantage to knowing how to use language, knowing how to ask really great questions and getting a good answer, but then also being able to question your answer and understand why you may or may not have gotten the right thing back, or why there's particular nuance you need to put into something, why an audience might respond in one way over another. That's the most powerful tool to be able to use AI and design things effectively. So I think there is a huge advantage for communicators.
Thank you. Prashant, we talk about predictive measurement a lot. How close are we really to a dashboard that tells us a crisis is coming before it hits? Is this a reality, or is this just science fiction for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, it can be a reality, which can be quite nerve-wracking, because just imagine a crisis dashboard which is always on can be sorted. With AI and with right prompts and with right context, it can be. But the issue is when we start to stare at this, it is nerve-wracking because it will give false positives, false negative, and imagine the amount of turbulence a person will go through while keep looking at it again and again. And that's where that moment of pause is so important, which is all about what is the insight rather than what's a dashboard. And if a dashboard can create a good insight, which is reflective of some kind of digestion of data, then it's more powerful. Because sometimes it's all about be careful what you wish for. A crisis dashboard is a wonderful thing, but it's also something which can be quite nerve-wracking. So I would look at it from a risk detection perspective, which is all about just giving early warning signals, but with some kind of digestion done through insights. And then what a real-time scenario in an ideal world, maybe 2026, would look like is the clients can preempt certain crises which are brewing, And a good scenario might be that they might have a response to it in case it starts to blow up. So less of kind of long weekend activity post late night and more of being very well prepared with crisis. And then the next story will be all about how do we really communicate in that crisis, which will go back to judgment.
Thank you, Prashant. That's excellent. We might get up the third and final poll question for today, if we can, which is another really good one in the vein of the last one, which is what metrics do you think are going to be most important in 2026 and beyond? So we put up some of the ones that we thought were valid options there as targeted reach, reputation, impact, AI visibility score. We know there's potentially plenty more, so there's another field in there as well. So yeah, please jump onto that. We'll come back to the answers on that shortly. And yeah, if you have any hot takes on what the others are, then please put them as comments or questions within that Q&A section. I want to go to that area that I mentioned earlier that Jason Shields asked a really great question around reputation. Jason asks, in communications, it can be very difficult to measure sentiment and reputation. What is your take on how AI captures sentiment and reputation from social media, where the negativity can be high, particularly in a local government space? Is large engagement a good or bad thing if the comments are largely negative?
Probably I can have a go at it. So in Southeast Asia, we see quite a lot of this. There are topics such as jobs, immigration, which are just chronically negative topics. So it's a lot about the baseline because social is a negative space because people need to get out or passionate about certain things to really invest in it from an engagement perspective. Otherwise, it's just silent majority. So it's a lot about seeing the baseline of that negative chatter and then looking at relativity, normalization, etc. really help to understand that if it's a chronic issue of, let's say, immigration or jobs or whatnot, it's all about what's the positive impact that a particular policy is doing, and then going back whether the policy is being communicated again and again in the right way. So looking at the delta of how negative is negative and how positive is that negative, and then really building on that delta through another kind of either policy clarification or further communication.
Thank you, Prashant. Anything to add to that, Ngaire, or I've got another question that I want to ask you about reputation?
I mean, quickly before we jump into that other question, I think, just to echo Prashant's point, and that one of the biggest challenges with reputation measurement is that there's just such a huge element of one size fits all. And I think especially in government spaces, that's not the case. And you do need to do a little bit of work to establish, not so much reputation is not even the right term, but that social license to operate, understanding what that baseline is, and then the things that actually impact it, because the nature of anything political and impactful on large amounts of people is that there's going to be a level of negativity that exists in just your standard baseline, and it's about creating and understanding that in your metrics and not getting too stuck in a one size fits all that might be like it's 80% negative when that doesn't indicate if something is good or bad or the work that you've done.
Yeah. Okay. And Nari, on that subject of reputational measurements, how do you think AI tools will, or in fact already are, impacting that style of measurement? Are we finally getting an upgrade to these traditional survey methods that we've used for decades?
Yeah, there's probably two ways to look at this. There's the opportunity to do the current style of reputation measurement better and faster. It has, because it's been very qual and quant market research heavy. They can be restrictive to budgets, and they can take a long time. You can run surveys and analyze the data much faster. I mean, even if any of you have played around with what kind of support you can get on a Google form now, like you're missing out. It's great. So all of that stuff is much easier to do. The other way to look at it, and it's something that I've been really actively working on at the moment, is how much data actually influences reputation. So what is that data? Where is it? and how can you maybe triangulate the data rather than only being stuck in this survey environment. So I think being able to apply data that is a bit more observational but is action based, so what people organically say and what you can see that they do depending on the data sets that you've got, and combining that with a more declarative set of data, which is survey, where people will tell you what they think they might do, but it may not necessarily be what they actually do. And there's a really interesting space developing around synthetic audiences, which I think is probably my most favorite and anticipated space that's bubbling up in this new wave of measurement. So that is the ability to train models to behave like your audiences or behave like your stakeholders. I don't know if anyone has necessarily done this with GPT or Gemini or any of those style of tools, but one of the most powerful ways to use it is to role play. So if you're communicating something and have it behave as if it's your CEO or a key stakeholder or a set of investors and have it challenge you about that. So it's that similar kind of idea where you can train a model, have it behave that way, behave like an audience that you've determined, which is really effective for like A/B testing or understanding if a message is going to land, identifying risk. It won't necessarily identify opportunity, but it can help you identify risk where things might go awry. There's a few, I think, ethical issues in this at its current form, and that, if there are really niche audiences and how data is trained, and going back to the transparency thing that I was talking about before, you've really got to know how these things are built, and you've really got to trust that those audiences are accurate. But I think in terms of the way that it could speed up and improve communication, I think that to me is one of the most interesting and fascinating areas that we see coming up.
I agree. Well said. Well said. We might get the responses to the third poll up now. So this is around which metrics are going to be most important in 2026 and beyond. And we see there's a nice cross section there. So obviously the broad bucket of impact and reputation leading the charge there ahead of AI visibility score and targeted reach. Thank you for everyone who participated in that. Joanne Jacobs also made a great comment in the Q&A section there, saying that that measurement in 2026 and beyond should consider the percentage of human input to engagement, which is a very interesting and worthwhile concept. I completely agree. Another question or kind of statement that has come through on the Q&A is a great one from John Liston, which kind of references back to the poll and the discussion on what we're killing, keeping, and creating around that ASR and AVE metric. And John raises the question as to why Isentia and I would say other media monitoring organizations continue to use AVE and ASR. And he suggests that these type of metrics can be helpful if you compare year to year in terms of the amounts, i.e. the percentage of change rather than the actual dollars. And this could tell you that your comms reflected a greater impact of your earned media coverage. In other words, an increase or a reduction of AVE could be due to, for example, position on a page, which page, reputation of paper, whether it was a metropolitan daily rather than a regional weekly, which I think from my perspective, before going to Ngaire and Prashant, I think you're spot on there, John. I think we continue to use AVE and ASR, and they are a staple of media monitoring platforms and services because we haven't worked out, sort of graduated to a better way. But the power in that metric is whether you call it AVEs or ASRs or bananas or hippopotamuses, it's the consistency and the benchmarking against that particular score. But I guess that's the point, isn't it, Ngaire and Prashant, that we need to find a better way to measure the impact or the volume of that content and be able to graduate away from the ASR and the AVE.
Yeah, I mean, I might need to respectfully disagree with John a little bit. Like I understand the idea of, yes, it is a year-on-year metric, but I mean a year-on-year metric that's not necessarily grounded in good practice is still a bad metric. I think the the point around the percentage change is true to an extent. Those numbers are in decline around the world, so you could be actually have the same, you could have done more work and have less dollars coming back to you. I also think that unless you are creating a net figure out of ASR, if you are taking your negative or neutral away from your positive, it's not really telling you anything other than space. Space is a, and space is a metric. It's not one that I think necessarily probably indicates all of the work that I'm sure that you're doing. So some of these are just trying to move away from those things. The swap out I tend to give people is actually, if you have an organization that really demands ASR, leave it there if you have to. But the biggest swap out you can start doing is a positive message penetration metric. So not even swapping it out for positive coverage, but actually like how much of what you're saying is resonating in the way that you want to, and how much potential exposure has that had, rather than just your name, is probably where I would start with that. Sorry, John.
It's very respectful. Prashant, I'm going to come back to you with another question. I've heard you say that authenticity is becoming paramount in an AI world. This is the premise for your PhD. We say it's almost like the graduation of trust or reputation. Why is that, and how can you potentially measure authenticity?
Yeah. So if you think about the gold mine, right, that's reputation, especially in this AI world, misinformation, disinformation, we all know. And reputation is something which everybody's trying to go for. But how do you even get that reputation? Because it's quite a downstream effect. It takes time to build. And if we start to just quickly pivot towards it, it would take at least a few months or a year, depending on categories. So then what can one do rather than just internally virtue signal? And that's where authenticity comes in, because authenticity is more upstream, as reputation and trust are more downstream. So think of authenticity as everyday practice, a practice which is not ethereal, a practice which can be measured through different kinds of signals. What we are doing is we are looking at decades of data sets and seeing that, okay, what has been seen as authentic by people, and then applying those signals into this AI world. For example, we recently released an article in Business Times, Singapore, and we were talking about there's a whole wave of creator CXOs because they are trying to go for leading from front from a reputation perspective. But when they post on LinkedIn, the engagement is quite low. So how do you do that when it gets real, as a CEO or CXO exposes themselves and posts on LinkedIn, and they're open to anybody commenting on what they're posting or engaging with? And that's where authenticity comes in, which is all about how do you signal right, how do you really share behind the scenes of what's happening in the company, show some third-party proof points, and then engage with the community. That's an authentic ritual on a day-to-day basis, which leads to reputation down the street.
Thank you, Prashant. Might go to another audience question. This one's from Theo Ifan. Thank you, Theo, for your question to Prashant and Ngaire. Theo states that AI speeds up data collection and measurement. How can organizations prevent an over-reliance on metrics and still prioritize human judgment, especially when audiences respond more to empathy and context than to dashboards?
So if you look at it right, the 2026 world, if agents are as reliable as we expect them to be, it's going to be a lot of matrix. It's going to be a whole dump of different matrix. And people who have not been exposed to matrix in the past will get overwhelmed. And there might be internal movement towards measuring everything. And that would be a double-edged sword. Why? Because it has quickly accelerated from no matrix to all matrix. And then the organizations and the stakeholders haven't got that seasoning time to think about what matrix matter. So it will boil down to the judgment of the leadership and the key stakeholders, especially in the comms space, to really anchor people in the right matrix and not all matrix. Because everybody can throw a data point around, check with AI on a data point to support any kind of hypothesis, and you would have that. So it's a lot about not people pulling each other in different directions, but a leadership being the center of gravity in the organization, and then really putting together the right matrix which go back to the right objectives.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is that you do need to go into these conversations with an opinion. And I think that's one of the things that I can see communicators struggling with, is that you are highly likely to have metrics set for you in some of these environments based on the data that's available, or whatever internal model might be being built, or what an insights team is doing internally. The best thing that you can do is be informed about what kind of metrics you want, and why you want them, and tell that story before the measurement is imposed on you. And if you are in a position in your organization to undertake that process and, use good evidence and have good logic as to why you want to measure something a certain way, that's typically successful, because otherwise people are just trying and scrambling to do the best with what they've got. But I think going into those rooms with a clear opinion about what you want and what that strategy looks like and how you're going to measure it is the most effective.
Nice one, guys. Okay, we're approaching the end of our hour, but we've still got definitely time for some more audience questions. So please keep them coming, and we'll get them answered before we end today. Ngaire, I want to pose this to you, but keen for you to jump on your thoughts as well, Prashant. If everyone on this call were writing an RFP for a new measurement partner tomorrow, what's the one killer question that they should ask suppliers so that they can understand if that supplier has the necessary process, methodology, and approach to AI to be the insights partner that they need?
Oh, I love this question. But also, I think it just shows that I'm such a nerd for evaluation in all forms, including procurement and tenders. I wonder if it's not actually a specific question, but it's an evaluation criteria. So I think if you think back to what I was talking about around trust earlier, and so much of AI and innovation right now does come back to trusted voices. I wonder if people need to consider a question or like a scoring category that's focused on innovation relevance. I think it's, if there's one thing that we can all be sure of, it's that everything and everyone is going to throw a lot of AI at everything. And it might be really great and it might perform its task really well, but it might not actually be relevant to you and your workflow and like your team's preferences. So one of the things that I think about quite a lot is AI behavior. And there's a lot we don't know about the interaction between a person and AI. Obviously, those companies know, but that's not really public information. And the technology is still early and so heavily language-based that there's sort of this behavioral bias blended towards using language to ask questions and get an answer. And one of the things that I've been really interested in, and I don't have an answer to, is if it's better to know what someone needs before they know it and proactively serve them that information, or allow them to like discover it themselves via a chatbot or a GPT style interface. And I use that example to make the point that I think everyone should ask for the logic and assumptions that go into innovation. Everyone's got a great roadmap, but kind of going back to the points around transparency and trust, so that you can make a really informed decision about who it is that you're choosing to partner with. All those roadmaps are, about to undergo or already undergoing really intense transformation. Things are going to move faster than anyone has likely experienced before. So I think the decision is not so much in the individual products, if they're real or if they're potential, that you're signing up for. It's actually more about that overall innovation trajectory and philosophy that sometimes isn't examined in as much depth as it could be in a tender process. So anything that sort of creates a evaluation criteria or a line of questioning that allows you to go a little bit deeper on that logic behind everything, I think would be really effective.
If I had to see an RFQ and a sandbox in an RFQ would be really good. So think of an RFQ, right? An RFQ is 2 paragraphs of what the organization does, a bunch of bullet points on what needs to be done, and then pages and pages about deliverables and compliance, so on and so forth. we are not using the first page of the RFQ to really have that thinking process for the agency. And what that might mean is share the overall objectives, but also provide the flexibility to the agency to meet them in different ways. And that's where that sandbox comes in, which goes to what Ngaire was saying earlier, which is a lot about the thinking behind how the deliverables would be and how they would actually impact the client objectives. Because now we are in a marketplace of metrics and different kinds of AI and different kinds of prompts. It's a lot about how is someone triangulating it all, sharing that in the sandbox in the RFP, and then putting the proposal together. It will also make the sales guys do more work.
Good call. Okay, I think we've got time for kind of one more question each, and this one is the nice outro, which is the one piece of advice question. So, I mean, as we said at the top, we do fundamentally believe, based on seeing it time and time again, that the organizations and the communications professionals who are most successful are the ones that use measurement to set that compass for success. But we get that it's easier said than done, and in times where budget can be more difficult to attain, and there's more challenge around internal buy-in and uncertainty than ever before, it's really difficult sometimes just to know where to take your first step in your measurement journey. So I guess to close out, maybe we'll go to you first, Ngaire, and then Prashant. What is your one piece of advice, whether it's on embracing AI or just taking that first step in measurement, that you'd give to our audience today?
Well, I have many pieces of advice. I think my main one would really be, and it's probably should resonate well with people that have turned up to a webinar on innovation. I think I'm back to what I was saying before. You do have to have an opinion. So you do have to think about what it is that you want to show the rest of your organization. You do need to have a think about how you think that should be measured. You can, consult a range of people or providers on that. But I think your voice is going to be the strongest in making sure that you're set up for success in how you communicate with your organization. That might be AI heavy or it might not. You might use tools that have AI in them, but knowing where your strengths are, knowing what you need support in, and knowing where you want to get to is going to be the most powerful way to move through this.
Yeah, I concur. I think that imagine the Christmas time and we are spending time with family, etc., and then we open a chatbot to ask stuff. Right? Let's not do that. Probably a paper before a chatbot would be my advice, because we are leaning in on our experience, our judgment, what we want to do in the 2026, and then asking those paper questions to the chatbot. So I won't jump onto opening my ChatGPT app. I might write on a paper or just have some conversation with ChatGPT AI mode to be reflective before I start to activate AI.
Thank you, guys. That was excellent. I succeeded in my mission to surround myself with the smartest people in the room, and I've learned a lot today. I hope everyone in the audience has, and whether you've been here live or you're watching this back later, we've been really excited and happy to have this conversation with you, and we know that it's one that is going to rapidly evolve. So as you finish off your 2025 and set your sights on even greater success in 2026, we'd love to discuss with you how we can help you to achieve those goals. Thank you all for coming along. Have a great end to the year, and we'll see you all in 2026. Thank you.